Welcome to Cyber Centuries from Cyberproof on True Story FM. I'm your host, John Richards. Here, we explore the transformative potential of AI, cloud, and cybersecurity, where rapid innovation meets the need for continuous vigilance. This episode is brought to you by Cyberproof, a leading managed security services provider. Learn more at cyberproof.com. On this episode, I'm joined by Jasson Casey, CEO and co-founder at Beyond Identity. The proliferation of agents and their interaction with one another has shown that identity alone isn't enough. The entire permission chain is needed to understand the scope of requests, as who called the agents and why provides context for what access they should have. Jasson shares how agents, like employees, thrive when properly trained and managed rather than sent out unprepared. Lastly, we explore how security policies not only stop risky actions, but can actually boost team productivity. Let's dive right in. Hello, everyone. We are joined today by Jasson Casey, CEO and co-founder of Beyond Identity. Jasson, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
So this is kind of a part two. When we spoke last time, we were talking about how the rise of AI, the importance of identity in that space. A lot has changed since then. So I'd love to get your take on how you see the world shifting since, we kind of spoke months ago. What's been the shift in landscape that you're seeing?
Let's see, what's changed? Everything and nothing. So obviously the world seems like it's just moving fast, right? Like, if you thought today was crazy, wait till tomorrow. We started our journey on securing AI last year, and we knew identity was a problem. We knew AI was going to kind of replicate security problems, kind of like IoT replicated security problems through scale. And you're seeing it today in the headlines, right? We're now starting to see all sorts of AI-related breaches. Anything from adversaries using AI to automate more of the process from their perspective, to defenders using AI to accelerate and automate the incident response process, to the use of AI actually creating issues, right? Like, I think the most tongue-in-cheek one was, yes, you're right. I apologize. I violated all the principles that I've been trained on when deleting your master database. It's like, okay, getting the agent to agree it did the wrong thing doesn't actually help the situation that much. The other thing that I think that's changed, I think organizations are starting to mature a little bit, right? So before we were talking about vibe coding, I think vibe coding is like the first stage of someone realizing what an agent can kind of do for them. Clearly, you can't put something that was vibe coded into production, but I don't think that's the point of vibe coding. I think the point of vibe coding is rapid iteration. I think the thing that you put into production is kind of like the next journey in how you actually use an AI, which is almost like adversarially. What I mean by that is I don't use AI to go off and do a monolithic thing. I actually break down the task. I may actually have a couple of different agents essentially acting as adversarial to each other in terms of do a thing, verify a thing, do a thing, verify a thing, do a thing, verify a thing. And so there's several strategies that revolve around those two principles of decomposition and adversarial production that actually are kind of like the next level, the leveling up from vibe coding, in how we actually produce things that matter. From our journey at Beyond Identity, the thing that's changed the most, I think, is we've introduced a product called Ceros. You can see it at ceros.sh. It is what we call an agentic trust layer. So we think there's an identity problem with running agents, but we think the identity is, while the foundation, it's got to be a bit more than just the identity of the agent and agent sessions. It really has to be around visibility of what is the agent doing, what agents exist in my environment, what are they doing, and one level down, what are they doing translates to what data are they accessing, not just what do they have access to, but what are they actually accessing, not just what tools do they have access to, but how are they using those tools. Are they using unvetted public tools with private, trusted, maybe even classified data? And are you actually tracking that on a per contextual loop basis? So, there's a lot that's going on that's changed since the last time we talked, but I think a lot of it really has to do with this theme of it's real. Organizations are now starting to adopt it or trying to, and we're hitting real operational roadblocks that we're now focused on trying to kind of take the first step over.
The world has changed a lot. And like you said, with the scale, it's become massive. Even your model, you talk about this adversarial model of agents working with themselves and other agents to go back and forth, has just seen so much growth. And what was maybe the springboard then to say, hey, we're tackling the identity layer, but we need more? Were you hearing requests from this coming in from people using this? Were you looking and saying, oh no, here's the fallout that's going to happen down the road? What was it that you were seeing that said, hey, let's invest in building something that's going to help address this at an even deeper level?
I think it really comes from personal use. When I say personal, I mean internal use. Well, let me back up a little bit. So we've been using AI really since the big GPT models landed, a lot like everyone. Initially as essentially a glorified search engine, right? A glorified way to ask questions about general knowledge discovery. And then we quickly moved into, well, wait a minute, it can write code. Let's see if it can write this code. Let's see if it can help debug a problem. Let's see if it can do X, Y, and Z. I think a lot of our use kind of stalled out in those two use cases until about late summer, early fall of last year. And that was when a critical milestone for us was passed. So it's, contrast this, right? So like the Frontier Labs folks, right? They're talking about critical milestones being around these highfalutin things, right? So it used to be the Turing test, and then now it's evolved to much more sophisticated test in terms of, is it intelligent? Can someone use it to lower the cost of manufacturing, like CNB, right? Chemical, nuclear, biological weapons, that sort of thing. Our test was a little bit more mundane. Our test was, when can it effectively port the 1990s game Command and Conquer Red Alert, not in a line-by-line way, but in a functional capability way, to a modern Mac development environment using the latest libraries for video and graphics, which is Metal in Mac's case. And that watershed moment of being able to port the game of our childhood occurred for us last year in October. In October, over a 3-day period, we literally got this game running in a semi-assisted sort of way. And that was the watershed moment for me, because it was basically something I did on the weekend. When I say semi-assisted, this was the first time where I told myself I'm not going to actually look at the code.
Wow.
I'm going to treat it as like a series of interfaces. And that was the first time I really adopted a sort of adversarial approach to the code synthesis. So while I'm not going to look at the code, I'm going to make sure that there's more than one agent running, and that some of the agents are focused on code quality, some of them are focused on interface constraints, and some of them are just focused on core generation and architecture. It was when I started to realize that the effectiveness of, well, actually, this came a little bit later, the skills. So skills is a very specific thing inside of Claude Code. Historically, you would call it a prompt template, but I think that's a little bit thin and not really giving credit where credit's due. Like a skill really is like a program. It's an LLM program. And so just like a computer program, it has a control flow graph. There's branching points and then there's action points. And realizing that like skills should be broken down according to this decomposition, and like skills can call other skills. And sometimes you may be using a skill for a deterministic problem. And we all know, or we should, that agents aren't good at deterministic problems, right? Like they give up, they get bored. Remember, they've been trained on the best of us that comment mostly on Reddit and Hacker News and Stack Exchange. So they may not even address our question. They'll just call us dumb. Well, they won't really call us dumb because they're super polite. They'll call us dumb as if they were an Englishman, and then and suggest an alternative solution. So yeah, all of these things, all of these learnings, I know I probably shouldn't go too deep on any of those, happened for us last year. And that was when we realized that we should embrace this, not for education and search and finding bugs and writing little bits of code to teach ourselves, but we should embrace them as actual workers in the business, in engineering, in QA, in product management, in product marketing, even in finance. Over the course of that journey in the second half of last year, that was when we realized it's more than just giving an agent an identity. You actually have to know, what is the agent doing? Knowing an agent's identity is not enough. It's like, all right, there's Joe. Joe's over in the woods and he's doing something, right? That's not good enough. You need to know, what is he doing? You need to know, what does he have access to? Does Joe have the ability to merge master? Does Joe have the AWS credentials that would let Joe push to production, right? And maybe Joe is super trained and under the active control of your SRE team, and you want that to be true. But that should be a positive control that you decided. It shouldn't just be happening. And so this collection of problems became obvious to us because there were real problems that we encountered. And that's kind of what set the guiding light for how we built out the framework of Ceros and its roadmap.
Well, first I have to applaud you and your team's taste in old video games. As an RTS fan, definitely love some Command and Conquer. So that's great. I love the story though, because what I'm hearing is just seeing how things went from that prototyping world to a world where this has real production impact. And if we're not using that, or at least teams in general who aren't starting to adopt that, are going to fall behind because of what it can do. But if you do adopt that, then all of a sudden there's all this risk associated. And so then, is there everything stop and go with some kind of process? So anyway, beautiful story of how that realization and then the need for what comes next. And I'm talking to folks who are doing very similar things with these adversarial models and trying to figure out how you roll this out. What are, especially if you look at a large enterprise, what are the new challenges at scale for them that these things you're talking about are addressing? Of, hey, we can't go to production, we can't do this. What are they looking at that says, hey, here's why I need to make use of an agentic trust layer?
So the first problem that exists at scale really is just knowledge. So let's go back to fundamentals. And I like to use NIST as kind of a reference framework, right? But like, you can't protect what you can't see, right? You can't protect what you don't understand, which is why NIST's framework starts with identify, right? The first pillar of NIST is know what you have an asset inventory. Because if you can't identify your assets, then how in the world can you protect them, detect things when things go wrong, respond to them once you detect, right? Like it all predicates on like, you should know what assets you have. You should know what they're using. An agent is an asset. An agent is an asset that can do the most damage the fastest. So you need to understand, where are all the agents? And if cyber has taught us anything, right, over the last 3 decades, it's that you're always going to get surprised, right? So you can't assume what your assets are. You have to continuously verify them, discover them. And so I think that's the first problem at scale that everyone has. In fact, we've only recently launched our product, but the pull in the inbound has been fairly strong. And I'd say 80% of the first conversations we have are really around this asset discovery use case. Help me understand. Sometimes they'll call it shadow AI, right? Sometimes they'll just call it asset discovery. Sometimes they won't put words to it. They'll just say, I'm pulling my hair out. I've been sidelined. The business has decided it can't afford to not embrace this. How do I catch up? How do I even know what's going on? So that's the first problem. So let's say 80% or 4 out of 5 people, that's the conversation we have. The next conversation, once you kind of have a handle on what you've got, is, well, now how do I establish controls? Not visibility controls, but, do something about it controls. How do I ensure that only my DevOps, only my SRE teams, and only the agents that they've actually really tuned have the ability to touch production, have the ability to merge master, have the ability to do these higher risk operations, have access to this higher risk data, right? And so this is really kind of this agentic trust layer that we were talking about, of it like enforcing policy. So that's really step 2. Most companies aren't there, but that's the very next step that they're going to make.
So on the asset side, how do you approach that? I think of, if you're trying to get all your assets in Amazon, you can crawl that, pull all that information. But AI is there's so many different things, whether that's people running local, whether it's going out, whether it's different IDEs. How do you start to get a grip on for them, to understand what that looks like, to know what they're supposed to be, what shadow AI or whatever term wants to be used that is running? What's the approach to understand that landscape?
This is where we actually kind of use some lessons that we had learned from the last 6 years of deploying beyond identity at scale, which is, all right, look, any deployment that requires the interaction with your end user, right, the workers, is most people aren't going to want to do it. Any of the ones that are going to do it, it's not that it's going to fail, but it's going to be a long slog, right? So number one, anything that we produce has to be deployable that does not require the end user interaction. That was kind of lesson number one. Lesson number two is you can't just deliver a single point of value. There has to be something for everybody, even if you're not asking them to do work. And so our initial capability, so Ceros it's this agentic trust layer. And so it starts off as an identity agent for your agent, if that makes sense. So our customer basically deploys this. They can do it manually if they want to do a little manual pilot, but we can automatically do it through an MDM. So MDM can install it and auto roll it in the background. And it uses kind of all of our traditional things that you've learned about beyond identity, right? Like this is a device-bound credential. It can't be moved. It can't be stolen for any agent on that machine, right? To leverage off of. But the next thing is when someone runs an agent, you have to do multiple things for them, is it will assign a device-bound ephemeral identity to that agent session. That way, that agent session can be given authorizations for more riskier things in the organization, right? So it's simple agentic identity. But since we're there, we can then run the discovery function. So for any of the agents that we control the identity for, we can go really, really detailed on tool discovery, tool use through arguments, right? So most people may not know this, but 50% of the effective tools used by most agents are not MCP tools. They're actually built-in tools. They're bash call-out tools. There's things in the local environment. Most MCP tools that we find to be most useful are also not MCP off to a SaaS service. They're MCP through standard IO. So again, locally, these agents tend to be maximally useful when they're interacting with things local on the device. So we surface that, right? We show all of the intricacies of that detail. So the 1-2 punch there is we do the discovery because we're there, but we also can kind of affix this device-bound identity to that running agent. For the agents that we're not providing the identity for, we can discover them through traditional scanning techniques, right? So installed agents, running agents, agent present signatures through file system interaction and network system interaction. So that lets us do things like we can discover AI providers. We can discover processes running on the machine that are actually using AI providers, therefore our candidate agents, like custom agents that your people might have built. This is all catalog driven, right? So we don't have to write new code to show you what's coming next. You can edit the catalog on your own if you want to. But while that's the first step in the journey, that's not really where we think we're going to give you the most value long term. We think we'll give you the most value long term by helping you not just attach that identity to the agent, but giving you that policy enforcement over exactly what the agent can and can't do. Or if we were to pop it up a little bit higher level, how do we ensure that only the people that are allowed to push to production and only the agents that have been trained to do that can do that and no one else?
Yeah, so that's moving into kind of that phase 2 you talked about as an organization starts to mature. Something you had mentioned earlier before we even jumped on here was this idea of chaining identities. I'd love to hear more about this, where it's not just the agent having an identity, but like who is working with that agent. And to me, this makes a lot more sense now as you talk about the level of internal tool interaction that's going on versus, just hitting a service somewhere. I could see how that's starting to be more important. But can you talk through what that looks like? Is multiple people across the organization are using this, but it matters if it's just somebody in sales versus maybe the VP of sales who's using this agent.
So again, this came out of learnings last year. So last year we did the typical thing when we started is we started minting some bearer tokens for agents and giving them to agents. Then we realized, all right, this is naive and useless. Like these things can be copied and proliferated. With any sort of definitive assertion, I can't say where this actually came from. So we realized these agents actually need device-bound credentials, right? So that was the first. So otherwise, we can't really tie them to a device, and tokens are stealable. All right. So the next thing we ran into was, okay, to make it useful, these remote tools, remote LLMs, need to be part of the solution, but they're still handing out these naive bearer tokens. So again, what do we do there? Otherwise, we're kind of back to square one. And so we introduced something called a DPOP tunnel. It's an IETF protocol, DPOP. You can look it up if you're interested. But at a high level, without needing to get into the weeds, is there a way for us to take these legacy tokens the big providers are issuing in our cloud, stash them, and then use device-bound credentials, not just for the authentication, but for the session, right? To where every session request itself has a device-bound credential that literally can't be stolen. That's kind of what Depop does. That was the second thing we did. It's like, okay, so now I can't steal the agent's identity. I can't steal any of the authorizations that are being issued to this agent. So that's kind of neat. But still, that's not enough because there could be a bunch of agents running on this machine, right? And I need to be able to tie them to their parent who gave birth to them, right? So is this a Claude Code instance? Is this a Codex instance? Is this a custom agent written by someone that's making use of Claude API keys? And then finally, just jumping to the end of the story. And then we also need to know who authorized it. What human is actually saying that, blessing this setup? So in our mind, an identity is not a singular token. An identity in this world is actually you think of it as a collection of things. It's what user authorized, what agent binary was used to give birth to the agent session, what services are being authorized, and what machine is this all taking place from. So that is the collective identity that must be present for that agent session. And all of that needs to be device bound. So if I were to copy it off, I can't just assume the identity or pretext everything that was just described, right? It has to have that copy resistance capability. It has to have that device bound capability. So that, we think that is really not just what's possible, but what's necessary for agentic identity. Because if you're not doing that, then you're basically setting yourselves up for all the holes and Swiss cheese of the old world, but now basically being, emulated at the speed of how fast an agent can run.
It's kind of like going from a 2D plane of identity to a three-dimensional space now where there's all these other attributes that come in. How does having that information empower folks as they try to get a handle on what is okay and what isn't okay in their network? Like, what are the policies that you're seeing come out of this that are enabled because you can now, have such kind of a granular control or understanding of what's going on?
You want your developers to be using agents. You want your developers to be able to use not just the standard Git commands with their agent, but you want developers to be able to use like the GH commands if they're using GitLab. You want them to be able to use additional DevOpsy, CI/CD things with their agents. Okay, that's great. But that joke I started with earlier, like, hey, I violated all of my principles, and yeah, I did delete that thing. That's funny because it didn't happen to us, but it did happen to somebody. Like that's actually real. And, there's less catastrophic versions of that scenario that are still equally painful. So how do you prevent that from happening to you? The answer is these are the fine-grained controls that you need to be able to set those things. This rubric that I keep coming back to that I think is, it keeps just generally proving useful, is the more you start to think about an agent as an employee and what would you do for that employee, How would you set controls and availability for that employee? How would you check up on that employee? That almost always gives the right mental framework for managing, whether it's how to use AI more effectively or how to set security controls that are empowering and not prohibitive.
That's a fascinating. I feel like I needed to take that, sit with some tea, and think about the ramifications because it does really change how I'm thinking about these agents. It also adds a little bit of, I don't know. I tend to think of throw AI out there. It's kind of a free action or something you don't have to think too much about. But realizing that each one of these takes some effort, some thought. It's not just put it out there and hope it all works together. But being intentional in that first step is really going to pay dividends down the road. What are some of the policies you see that do you have like here's kind of a base set of policies we recommend then, or is that more conversational?
So it's definitely conversational, and it really depends on where the customer is in their journey. But we had one person come to us recently, and they had about 1,000 different policy rules that they were actively managing through Anthropic's management interface. And so in my mind, a policy rule could be something like a permission rule that you're pushing. It could be something like an MCP configuration that you're pushing. The way it was set, the way this individual was trying to set their controls, it was, number one, an admin nightmare for them. Like they were literally going to have to hire people just to help manage it. Number two, it only covered Claude Code. It did not cover other agents that were being used in their environment. And so the thing that we actually did with them first was just trying to understand, like, what's the intent of all these rules that they're actually trying to manage, firstly with Anthropic and Claude Code. And a lot of the rules really fell into, how do I ensure my developers are using the MCP tools that have passed third-party risk, that have SOC 2, that aren't going to put me in violation of existing customer contracts, as opposed to something they found that's cool, but it's not necessarily vetted. Number two, their developers, it's funny if I'm making a joke, I'll say developers are lazy. If I'm not, if it's a more serious environment, I'll say, like, look, you don't really want to go push your developers to go all have to establish some sort of configuration to be useful, right? You want to put them in a high productive environment. You want to make sure they have the best meals. You want to make sure they have the best tracksuit, right? The best running shoes, etc. And so they wanted to write policies that essentially ensured that around tool usage, like that they're going to use the best tools, that they're going to start with some Claude memory that shapes and steers the behavior of the system. And so these were all these are all examples of policy rules. And they were trying to set this, and they were also trying to set it in a generic way to where it impacted all of their developers. And so we were able to kind of walk them through what that would look like in our system, where it's not just Anthropic specific, but it could kind of apply to all. And, the thing that we kind of learned in that engagement with them was, you're not just delivering a policy engine that can execute on these rules in a fine-grained way. You're also delivering an operations agent to your customer as well, because they do need an assistant to operate, right? You can use AI not just to build code. You can use it or to build things. You can use AI to operate things. We had the idea, but they gave us the reason to accelerate, and so it's now in the product now. But we have this thing called Ceros Agent, where you just interact with it in a human style to basically hammer out the policy that you want. So you could literally just give it a copy of what you've kind of scripted out already for like an Anthropic style config, and it will help you turn that into a Ceros style agent agnostic config.
That's so cool. I also want to highlight like something you said there, because I think in the security space, it could feel like to outsiders, this is the team that keeps me from being productive sometimes, or they're the barriers I have to get around. But you were highlighting here that some of these same policies are actually also ways to increase productivity across the organization by giving them a better starting base they might not know about, ensuring the tools they're using are just right. And anyway, I just wanted to re-highlight that, because I think it's fascinating to be like, oh, what drove, this quarter's productivity in your organization? And to be like, oh, it was, the way we implemented our AI policies is is not where you would expect to hear that, but could absolutely be the case as standardizing on these kinds of things, but making sure, especially the newer folks coming in who don't know, are starting in that kind of environment that's primed for learning. So anyway, I find that fascinating and very exciting side value of course we have to lock this stuff down, but also by providing this environment, just to your analogy of a person training, there's things they can't eat. Okay, yes, but you're also making sure the things they are getting are optimized for their performance. Anyway, loved it. Thank you for sharing that. This has been fascinating. Thank you for sharing all of your thoughts here along this. Saros, amazing. Our audience should definitely check this out. You gave the website already, but anything for somebody out there who's in this spot, they're going through agentic transformation, what would you say to that person about why they should go check out Saros right now?
Saros right now, so unlike most security companies, we actually provided a PLG or product-led growth style on-ramp. So you could actually go to saros.sh and create a tenant and try it out. There's no barrier for you to kind of see it in action. We're happy to jump on a Zoom and kind of give you the white gloves experience if you think this can make a meaningful impact in your business. But like we also felt pretty strongly that we wanted to lower the barrier and make it easy to try, which hasn't really historically been a feature of security products. It's been more of a feature of like IT products. But this is the second thing where we actually believe IT and security products really ought to just become the same thing, because it's not just about protecting people, but it's about enabling people to run faster. And so it's productivity and it's security. It's not one at the expense of other. So yeah, try it out now. And then, the only other general advice I would say is the most useful analogy I can give anyone in thinking about how to actually interact with the agent better, how to set an environment for the agent to operate, how to actually talk to your team about running their AI transformation, is think of these agents as employees. And if you haven't done anything, think of them as an employee intern, right? And they're gonna be full of energy, and they're gonna be whip smart, and they're gonna do 16 things wrong faster than you can catch up, right? And as you shake them and as you tune them, they literally mature and they get better. And just like employees, they work better in teams. They work better where you actually give opposing objectives to different people and kind of let them work against each other. What is it? Iron sharpens iron. It's agents sharpen agents. Think of them like employees will probably put you in the better or best mindset to really kind of figuring this out.
Well, thank you again, Jasson. For our audience, definitely check out Saros. If you took nothing else away from this, I think the mindset of thinking of these agents as employees and the value of security and productivity being together, not seeing them as secondary things. Like, those are huge takeaways I'm taking out of this that I think are incredibly meaningful. So thank you for highlighting those and sharing so much of the journey that you all have been through. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you, Jasson.
Thank you.
This podcast is made possible by Cyberproof, a leading co-managed security services provider, helping organizations manage cyber risk through advanced threat intelligence, exposure management, and cloud security. From proactive threat hunting to managed detection and response, Cyberproof helps enterprises reduce risk, improve resilience, and stay ahead of emerging threats. Learn more at cyberproof.com. Thank you for tuning in to Cyber Sentries. I'm your host, John Richards. This has been a production of True Story FM. Audio engineering by Annie Nelson. Music by Amit Sagi. You can find all the links in the show notes. We appreciate you downloading and listening to this show. Take a moment and leave a like and review. It helps us to get the word out. We'll be back July 1st, right here on Cyber Sentries.